Hello and everyone, welcome to the fifth webinar for the Sustainable Cities course. This week in the sixth module, we looked into issues of basic services and infrastructure provision in the way that is efficient and equitable. Today, we are joined by Peter Newman, who is the Distinguished Professor, School of Humanities, Research and Graduate Studies at Curtin University, Sustainable Policy Institute in Perth, Australia. He has written over 17 books and over 300 papers. In 2014, he was awarded an Order of Australia for his contributions to urban design and sustainable transport. So we'll start this presentation, this webinar, by listening to Peter, who's going to be presenting a small PPT and then a video, and then we'll take in your questions. So while he's presenting, we encourage you to put in your thoughts, comments, and questions in the chat box so that we can post them to Peter. Over to you, Peter. So if you can, hello?
Okay.
Peter? Yeah.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes. Could you make your presentation full screen?
Full screen, all right. That means I'll...
press F5. You can press F5.
Sorry, it's got a Google Hangout thing in the way.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, that's full screen.
Yes.
Except for this silly thing from Google Hangouts. All right.
That's fine. That's fine, Peter.
All right, I'm ready to go. So I'm talking from Sydney, but I come from Perth. And this is about sustainable transport in a global concept. And I will try to see how it works, if I can make it work. There we go. So these are some of my books. Cities and Automobile Dependence came out in 1989. So that's 30 years old now. And Sustainability in Cities came out in 1999. So it's 20 years old, but both of them were setting the scene because they were the first time we got numbers on cities and how they used transport and how they used land at the same time and the energy implications. So that's why they've been well used around the world. The kind of numbers we get shown in the next screen where we've got, you can see Perth compared to Mumbai there. Now, the American cities are off the planet as usual, and they around the 100 mark for some of them of gigajoules per person. Perth is about 40 odd, and then you get down to the European cities in the middle, which are half of that, around the 20 mark or less, going right down to Barcelona at 8. And most of the cities that I dare say the audience is coming from, 2 or 3 gigajoules per capita. So they're almost not on the same scale as the developed cities in the Americas and in Australia. So you can see there's a big difference, a very big difference, and more so than the wealth differences. And the key thing that shows the difference is, and why, is the density. So the dense cities of Asia are clearly, over 200 to 300 or more, sometimes, people per hectare. These are very carefully worked out densities. They're not political boundaries, they're actual boundaries of cities. Then you come to the European cities, which are around the 100 to 50 mark, and the Australian American cities less than 20. And Atlanta down there, it's 6 people per hectare. Perth is 12. So very big differences. Now, what we make of this is that there is an exponential relationship between density and transport. The car-based cities of the world are very low density. The medium density transit cities of Europe and so on are in the middle there. And the more walking-oriented cities are much denser. But you go around that curve pretty sharply, and then the density doesn't have much more of an effect. So the cities of India, for example, have a lot of dense walkable areas with narrow streets that are not really designed for cars. And you can see here there's not a single car in this street. Now, we made a film called Taming Streets, Design, Deliberation and Delivery in Indian Cities, which you can get off the web. It's a YouTube film, and it shows some of the variations in the cities and what can be done about it. Because in Pune, for example, we did a project that was trying to show how to help pedestrians. You can see this poor chap trying to run across the middle of the traffic. I probably have all tried that at some time. We did lots of transparent processes to try and get what ordinary people wanted in the city. We got consensus on what should be done, including having politicians in the room who were able to help deliver it. And the local government and national government people were very helpful, and a lot of that was done. And some of the streets were enabled to be more pedestrian friendly, to fix up some of the water issues, and to enable them to be more friendly places again. In other words, respecting the fabric of that place. The second project was in Bangalore. It's about the metro there and how to manage some of the implications of it. It was really trying to show that you can extend it and at the same time not displace the poor, which is a big issue. Again, we had a successful, transparent process and were able to show that the land values go up quite rapidly along the corridor of the new metros. This means that it will attract development, and particularly it will do it even in middle suburbs where centres have been hard to develop. But if you've got a good railway system like a metro, you can get a new centre. And so you do get this kind of thing happening, that big developers move in and you can live right next to a railway and therefore have options that you didn't have before. So this raises issues of equity, and we had people studying that. And some of these areas, for example, right next to the metro, could possibly disappear. But because of their land ownership, they weren't, because it's very hard to purchase the whole thing. But greenfields areas, brownfield areas, old industrial areas next to stations were being developed. So just a bit of theory about all this. And it's in our third book, which came out in a couple of years ago, The End of Automobile Dependence. It shows that car use is going down in the developed cities on a per capita basis, not predicted by the transport specialists, because wealth was going up, but car use was going down. This was not thought to be right. The same thing happened in Australian cities, same year actually, 2004-5, and down it went, continued to go down. There's lots of reasons for it. The density is actually rising again in these cities. It's because cities are coming back in for many economic reasons, but most of all it's about travel time benefits. The reality is most cities are stuck in their traffic. So if you put a rail system in that goes past the cars, faster than cars, then the data shows that, and most of the theory will show, that people will get out of their cars and move to use that metro. So metros are being built all over the place because of that. And there's a cultural change factor. A lot of younger people are not as enamoured with cars as their parents. And the knowledge economy. The knowledge economy is the jobs that are based around people coming together face to face. They need to do projects around a table on a coffee shop usually. So the global growth is now in rail, and 82 Chinese cities have built metros. There's high-speed rail between all the cities in China. In Indian cities, you've got 51 building metros, Modi's program. And even in the Middle East, cities building rail for the first time. You can see the graph there of Beijing. Car use is actually beginning to go down in Beijing as the metro takes over. So we've developed an approach to say, well, we've now got a market for rail. It's not just a welfare system anymore. Public transport has a real market. So why not get private sector funding to help build it? Because there's not nearly enough public transport being built anywhere. And this market was definitely helped when we came across the Trackless Tram, which is a new invention out of China. It uses innovations from high-speed rail. You can see the batteries on the roof. So it's electric. It looks like a light rail, but it is in fact a very smart bus, and it can go fast, and its ride quality is superb. I went to China and rode this, and it is a real breakthrough technology. I think it is going to be very significant in many cities. Now, I've got a little video I want to show, but it's not here. Let's finish the PowerPoint, and then we can quickly look at the video when I can get access to my desktop again. So I'll come back to that. But essentially, what we're doing is seeing that cities are packed out with cars, and you'll never be able to satisfy the space needs of the car. So replacing that many cars with 3 buses or 1 light rail is the nature of the game. And the light rail these days is likely to be a trackless tram. So where do we go inside the city? The reality is there are 3 kinds of cities in every city. The old walking cities, the transit cities that went out along tram and train lines, and then the car-based cities. And in many of the developed world cities that have grown fast in the last 50 years, they've got a lot of automobile city. And the big thing is to see that they're now wanting more walking and transit city. And it's important to see that in the developing world as well, because there's really no point in developing that automobile city fabric, because it is really expensive and not very sustainable. For example, in American cities, the top 6 most walkable cities have 38% higher wealth levels. 70% of knowledge economy workers in Boston live in walkable areas. So competitive cities are going to be more walkable and have more transit. That's the conclusion. Now, if you look at I'm on the IPCC, and climate is a big issue in this transit system, in this MOOC, in all issues around the world. The blue line is wealth, gross national income, and GHG is greenhouse gases. You can see they're decoupling and have been for most of this century. It turned around about 2000s. The decoupling means we're finding out how to grow in wealth without needing carbon emissions. It's a turning point. And for the last 2 years, greenhouse gases have gone down. Denmark was one of the first to show the way. Most European cities similarly. You can see 2001, away it went, showing how wealth, before that it was struggling a bit, but the wealth went up, oil and coal went down. In Australia, wealth has gone up substantially, and the coal is now going down and oil is plateauing. In China, it is also decoupling very rapidly, and the coal and oil are going to disappear. In India, it's harder because you're coming from a smaller base in terms of wealth, but I think it will turn quite quickly. So the predictions after the peak, in terms of the peak in that we've just seen in CO2, for me, wealth will keep growing. Renewables will take over as first coal, then oil, then gas disappear. And the future of the world will be dependent on this process occurring quite rapidly. But the key thing is that it's not a question of trading off against wealth. Wealth can continue to grow, and we can have a fairer and better world with more opportunities, but we can make this transition. So I'm going to end that there and just show you my trackless tram video, and then we can have a chat. Here it comes. It is electric. It can be recharged at stations in a fully solar way. It's an extraordinary vehicle, but it's a tenth of the price of a light rail. Now, this is a major breakthrough, and I would predict that hundreds of cities are rapidly going to demonstrate this. Okay, I hope you got that. Sorry, I've got too much in the way here. There we go.
Yeah, you can.
That's had 2 million hits. So I'm a superstar on social media. No, I'm not. But anyway, it was nice to see it was popular. What do we do next?
You could stop the screen share for now.
Okay.
Then we'll post you the questions that you can answer. We've already have 15 in line for you.
You are screen sharing. Where does it say to stop it?
No, not that.
I can't see where to stop it.
No.
No. Yeesh. I'm not very good at this, am I?
Perfect. Right, we'll jump in right on the questions then. The first question is from EU, and they've asked if you could shed light on the steps being taken by EU to reduce air travel and fuel consumption, like, for example, your presentation. How high-speed rail lines are connecting several countries. Do you think we can expect alternative travel options in South and Southeast Asia?
Did you start by saying air travel?
Yes.
Or just
is there an alternative to air travel?
Oh, alternative to air travel. No, I haven't talked about that. Look, that's a big issue. On the IPCC, the latest reports say there is still no breakthrough in what to do about air travel in terms of it is still growing very rapidly, and it is using oil. It is a greenhouse gas problem, as is shipping. Trucks are not doing much better. Buses are now transferring over to electric, especially in China, where most of the buses now are electric, and some in Europe are. This is why the Trackless Tram is so important. It will replace buses and it will replace light rail at much lower cost. But and cars will go electric. Even tuk-tuks, auto rickshaws, bikes, they all will go electric. But planes, that's a problem. And the only thing that we can suggest in terms of carbon is biofuels. And biofuels still need a bit of a breakthrough. It's possible that we can make biofuels that are cheap and not taking away from food. But in terms of reducing air travel, I don't think you've got a show of doing that. It is so much a part of the culture and economies of every country now. High-speed rail certainly has helped in places like Japan, where there's significantly less air travel now internally. But high-speed rail systems across the whole of Europe are there in place, but the air travel is still increasing in most of Europe. So no great solution on that front that I've seen.
Right, thank you. So Satya would like to know what can be done to address infrastructure and public transportation deficits in a country. Can civil society or individuals contribute to this in any way?
Yes, indeed. If you would like to look at the entrepreneur rail model, you can Google that and you'll find papers on it and so on. This is a way of a bottom-up approach to public transport. For the last 50 years, public transport has been entirely a government thing. That hasn't been in the past. The first trams and trains in all the world, across all countries, were private. They were put together by local communities and local governments with private sector investment as real estate projects. So they helped to develop new suburbs and city areas. This model can be repeated. You can, in fact, form an association which can get together with the local government, with developers who want to put money into land development, but it needs unlocking. The good thing about the Trackless Tram, for example, is it's reasonably cheap and you could put it in a corridor that would unlock the land development opportunities, and you can pay for it out of those land development opportunities. That's the breakthrough that we're now working with, and a number of places are taking it on. 3 cities in Africa are going to try and develop trackless tram projects paid entirely out of private funding.
We've a couple of questions from the webinar that's going live right now. Erum from Karachi says the biggest problem we face in cities of third world is that the population, the natural resources, water crisis, and lack of funding for infrastructure provisions like these. How do you prioritize, and what is there an easy formula for this?
Well, it's not an easy formula, but what I just said then is a significantly new thing to think about, that there is a lot of money in every country that can be put into infrastructure, but it's not going into infrastructure because it's depending on governments to invest it. And governments have very little access to these funds, global funds, because it affects their credit ratings and they don't, they're not trusted to be the investors. So if you can attract superannuation funds, the pension funds, the various financing bodies, and create a new model, it's a bit like tollways. Tollways are going into many cities across the world, and they're not helping them much because they're creating more opportunities for cars, and the cars fill the cities, and everyone says there's too much pollution and too much just catering for the wealthy. And that's absolutely right. So we need to get a mechanism like that helps pay for itself. The governments don't have the money, so let's try and attract other sources of money. And the way to do it is through land development. So you have to combine transport infrastructure with land development. Then you'll get the finance. That's the breakthrough in my thinking. It's taken me a while to get there, but quite seriously, it is the way public transport was first done. So if you want to solve transport issues, start thinking like they did 100 years ago when the first trams and trains were built. But have a look at it now in terms of this new technology, such as a trackless tram. You get that into a city, you will find developers will want to build around it, and then you get them to pay for it.
Right. Louis would like to know, in every growing city, there are many modes of transport that are completely disarticulated. What should be the due sequence or steps to design or implement to sort of bring them all on one platform, or to implement an appropriate strategy to fix the complexities of managing different modes of transportation?
Disarticulated. Does that mean they're not all integrated?
Possibly. I think that's what he means.
Yeah. Well, I quite like the disarticulated cities of India where you have auto rickshaws piling around, taking people on demand in all kinds of directions, and particularly picking up people at stations. So you extend the area that people can use the train. So the metros in India and China are now working well because they have lots of these little devices that come around the stations and pick people up and take them to their homes or businesses. Now, you cannot organise that. It is just a purely on-demand thing. It is a completely market-led device. But you can integrate buses into trains. At the moment, mostly, buses have been working away down their own corridors and the trains have come in and they are completely competing or unconnected. Now, that's a process that really does need government intervention to say, right, this is your new bus route. It will come into the train and your people can get off that bus onto the train and then go quickly across the city instead of getting stuck in the traffic. That's the problem with buses. They get stuck in the traffic. And if you can get them to go outside that normal route they've been doing and integrate, then you've got a major breakthrough. So bus train integration is what you should work on. Let the auto rickshaws and so on do their disarticulated best.
Right. Colin would like to know of any examples that you would know of any modeling associated with shifting distribution transport to an after business hours model.
That means that the people who would use the transport are not part of the mainstream business, because if business hours are certainly being served by transport and there's all kinds of peak problems, that's because people want to go home around about the same time. Now you can say, right, we're going. I'm Joseph Stalin and I'm taking over this city, and there's going to be working hours that go for 24 hours, and we're going to have shifts in the offices, and you'll have to apply to say which shift you're on, and that'll solve your transport problems, because the shift that's on from 12 till 7 in the morning will have plenty of space. Nobody's going to do that. You will not be able to do that. And the reality is the ways in which people are encouraged to go before or after peak times, there are all kinds of ways of doing that, but none of them are very successful. People need to be together. See, that's the reality. If you say, well, there's going to be a shift of work, knowledge economy jobs, like university teaching, is going to be from 7 from 7 at night till midnight, and then from midnight to 7 in the morning. Well, nobody's going to do it. You need to get together if you're going to be working together, and every business is going to object if they're going to be told to have different hours for people to work. They need them around, so they're going to be travelling in peak times. Very, very sorry to say, there is no instant solution to the peak transport problem, other than getting good public transport that takes much more people than any road.
Right. Yashaswini asks, would you say developing cities in developing countries should or not go into transit-oriented development? Most parts of India would go for luxury, then live sustainability. Is there an alternative?
Well, let's just think about that. Much of India was built in a transit-oriented way before the motor vehicles. It's not a new invention made by Western countries. It's been around for a long time that you make cities around transit. And we're rediscovering how to do that. And, the Americans making a real big thing about it, because they do so little of it that when they make one, they think it's rather special. But Europe's almost entirely transit-oriented development. And most of the redevelopment going on in Australian cities is transit oriented. No one's saying, oh, we're making a TOD, aren't we special? It's just what you do now because this is how you make money and this is the demand. So that you can get on and do that. But the important thing to see is that if the wealthy come and live near a train line, so they use a train instead of using a car, that's a good thing, right? You're getting the wealthy off the roads. If the middle income people come and they've got access to a train as well, that's a good thing. If the poor have as well, fine. So what you need is to be able to say transit-oriented development ought to have a mix of incomes available. And that's the key thing to do. You've got to have a mix of housing prices, affordable housing as well as wealthy housing. You don't say it's wrong to build wealthy housing near train lines. Getting wealthy people off the roads gets them out of their cars, and they use cars more than anyone, so get them off the roads. That's what we want. So I don't see that it's a fundamental problem, especially if they're going to buy the units that the developers are trying to sell and help subsidise the more affordable ones, which is the model we're adopting in Australia. That essentially you build your transit-oriented development and you require 20 to 30% that is affordable, but that has to be paid for out of the more wealthy units that are provided. And they want to buy it because it's near a train line and they get past all the traffic, go to work with their computers and sit on the train and enjoy doing a good commute. So really, it is a matter of not seeing that the wealthy are necessarily a problem in sustainable transport.
On that same note, Satpal asks, how does one incentivize public transport manufacturing sector over private vehicle manufacturing? Any examples of that?
Yeah, good question. Because there is no reason why we can see any reduction in the need for public transport. It's going to keep growing. It is the big growth sector in transport now across the world, and every country should really be looking to manufacture because it's not that hard to do. The Trackless Tram, for example, the Chinese are saying they would be involved in it, but every country can manufacture that. It's not that hard to do. The key things are the smart parts of it, the operational systems, which are software that enables it to run with all the autonomous character. It's optically guided through LiDAR and GPS and following that white track on the road. So that comes with it, but and that's the secret bit, if you like. That costs a bit of money, but not much, because how much is software? But the building of the structure of things, that can be done in any country. It's not hard. So it is a matter of just negotiating when you get these things set up and you want to buy a system. You say, all right, come and build it here, and we'll make a business around it, and all the employment will be done here. And this is how we progress with our public transport systems.
Right. But on the discussion forum, we've seen a lot of questions on the same front where there were comparisons with a lot of Nordic countries like Copenhagen, where people have written that Nordic countries have reduced automobile dependency through drastic measures such as high parking rates, congestion charges, road pricing, speed limits, etc. But in countries like India, car usage is still on an increase, companies making more and more cars and making them more and more affordable. So it would be almost impossible to expect that the shift to public transport would come from the consumer side. Why are national or city governments trying to fix it with policy? Why are they reluctant to impose the same drastic measures to cut down automobile dependency?
Yeah, the countries where there has been, or the cities where there's been significant reductions in car use, have generally done that by a combination of things. Um, the ones that you've picked on there were at the transport end of things. They were, like congestion charges, constrained parking, um, and that's true. They are demand oriented things. In China, they've been very strong on the cost of a license and not being allowed to uh, drive on certain days. But really, the main thing you can do in overcoming automobile dependence is about providing a decent transit system and to build housing near it. And that kind of process is a constant upgrading. And those cities have done that now. It's very easy to get people because you got the carrot as well as the stick. And the stick is not really as much of a tool as you were suggesting. In Copenhagen, for example, which I've lived and worked in and worked with the authorities, the most important thing they did to attract people into the centre and to enable bicycling rather than cars was to take parking out. They didn't actually ban it or anything. They just took away the spaces where people were parking and turned them into really beautiful malls or squares where people could do things. They could have lots of stalls and, like the hawkers in India, lots of activities that bring people together. And 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 so it was a much more carrot that and people got on their bikes to get there, not because they were being beaten up, saying, "Oh, I want to go in my car, but I'm not allowed." No, it's much easier to just get on your bike and go there and enjoy the space, and that's the thing. If you've and making the space available for the bikes was easier than, and now they've got more bikes than cars. Um, I don't think it's all about using the stick. You've got to do the design things as well. You've got to do the attractive spaces in the cities. And there's not nearly enough of that going on in Indian cities. I don't think you just go around like big tourists trying to force people out of their cars.
Um, could you speak up a bit when, in the next question? The next question is, how does one estimate required capacity in terms of number of transport managers that the current mega cities require? And any ongoing studies on capacity building for sustainable transport management, especially on the demand side of it?
Capacity building in what we're doing now. What is capacity building in sustainable transport? It's probably going and seeing demonstrations. It is certainly finding out examples of where things have worked, and I don't know that you get much capacity building by reading books about it, but going to the cities where this is working, and I think that India is getting to the point where you can say some cities are now beginning to work well. For example, Hyderabad has done a privately funded rail project. Has that worked? Well, study it, find out whether it has. It, um, certainly, there are examples now of areas where you've got more attractive places for people to walk. That there is now in Pune, for example, the groups there that brought us over, they have reclaimed streets to make them more walkable. So you can see what is happening and use that to learn from. I used to write about what Australian cities could do based on all the travels I've done around. Now I find I can get all the examples I need from our own cities because we've done a lot, and it's actually better to understand from your own perspective. There's certainly cities in your own country, there will be good examples that you could use to build capacity around.
Right. We will now have our last question for today's webinar. We've had quite a few in waiting, but in the interest of time, we'll pick one more and then we'll close this. So Thomas asks, are there any universal benchmarks of sustainable transport systems? If yes, are there any monitoring mechanisms in place?
Well, I've been collecting data on cities for 40 years, and we find that the really critical things are, first of all, whether per capita car use is going up or down. And in all the developed cities now, you can say it's going down. And we've now found it in Beijing and Shanghai. If you study it closely, you can see why, and the other indicators are about how whether or not public transport is now faster than traffic. That's the other thing that you need to do. Compare the speed of the public transport, the speed of traffic, and average traffic speeds are collected and part of the road management modelling. You will find it in every city. But to get the speed of trains and trams and buses, you just need a timetable and you add it all up, and you can find out. But the key thing is that in every city we've studied, buses are never faster than the traffic, and trains are, and in certainly all Asian cities that's the case. There's only a few American cities where that's not the case yet. All the Australian cities, it's the case. All European cities has been for a while. And the key thing is that you need to provide that kind of infrastructure. The Trackless Tram, I think, is for the first time a cheap train. And it is enabling cities to have that opportunity. So there are two indicators. The other one will be the amount of greenhouse gases that are coming from the city. You will need to report on that anyway as part of the Paris Agreement. That's the kind of thing cities are going to have to do. And the air quality is a very good indicator as to whether or not the city is managing its transport, because if there's a lot of smog around, then it's generally due to the cars. That'd be a good start for me. But that's apart from the obvious ones about road accidents and the ability of cyclists to move safely. Those kind of issues can also be measured.